You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He's achieved a level of mastery as the drummer for the diamond-selling band Our Lady Peace. He's also a best-selling author, and he's the co-host of the Taggart and Torrance podcast, which has been downloaded over 4 million times. So welcome to the podcast, Jeremy Taggart. Jeremy, how are you? And what was your reaction recently when tennis legend Serena Williams shared in an interview that she's a massive Our Lady Peace fan?
Thanks for having me, Joel. I appreciate doing this. And yeah, that was pretty cool to see because Venus and Serena came to shows in the past, and I think as early as the early 2000s, and would speak, when they talk about how much they loved listening to us when they're practicing, and just super nice people. And it was, yeah. I mean, when the goats, as they say, would start talking about you, it's pretty cool for sure.
Yeah, in the interview or in the article, she mentioned she goes all the way back to the Clumsy album. She loves Superman's Dad and the song Clumsy. So they're lifers, man. They go all the way back.
For sure. And that they would talk about how they would practice listening to it. So you really appreciate that when you hear it, because you never know where music's going to end up, and it's nice to see that kind of stuff happen for sure.
It's funny, the mix of athletes and musicians, where it's like the athletes always they love the music and want to hang out with musicians, and the musicians always kind of love the sports and the athletes. So it's kind of a world that works together between the two.
Absolutely, for sure. And me growing up as a kid playing baseball and kind of being an athlete, I understand that for sure. Like, I really was dedicated to baseball as a kid. So and I actually lived with Sean Avery for a while in LA, and other hockey players. So that athlete musician thing is definitely a reality.
So I like to start the interviews by sharing with our listeners how I know the guests, and it shows the importance of networking, of building community, of developing, cultivating relationships. So in our case, we get started with me just as a fan. I own the first 5 Our Lady Peace albums, so I was a massive fan, and I've seen the band multiple times in concert, going all the way back to 2000. So I'm going to share, I have a few pictures I want to share here that I think will set the tone for this interview. So I'm going to share my screen, and let me know that you can see this. So yeah. So Somersault 2000. So the first time I saw Our Lady Peace was in Ottawa on August 13th of 2000. And can we take a second to just soak in the lineup of bands here? So our listeners that aren't watching, we have the Smashing Pumpkins, Our Lady Peace, Foo Fighters, A Perfect Circle, Deftones, Trouble Charger, Catherine Wheel, Eve 6, Finger 11, Sum 41. I mean, this lineup, this ages like a fine wine. What do you think about this lineup here?
Yeah, I mean, that was our dream festival, right? So and the funny thing that solidifies that. I remember Billy Corgan said on Howard Stern that there was some argument that happened with us that we wanted to headline, and they said, no way, we're headlining. And that's total bullshit. From day one, as you can see, the lineup was always the Pumpkins headlining, but because you have the actual set and generally where everybody played. So
that's the order of the lineup that I remember.
Yeah,
Sum 41 were not even big yet. They had just released their first single ahead of the album release. Like, that's how long ago this was, the beginning of Sum 41.
Well, and this festival was basically our dream festival as a band. Like, we'll pick favorite bands that we liked at the time, and me being, I was kind of friends with a lot of drummers, and so as you can see, there's a lot of great drummers ended up at this with, obviously with the Foo Fighters, with Dave and Taylor, and Josh Freese was in a perfect circle, and Abe Cunningham in the Deftones, and just a lot of wicked drummers. So that was kind of the coolest thing at the show, was just all the drummers were always just kind of hanging outside stage, checking out the other band. So for me, it was just having a really great hang with a lot of my favorite musicians.
And it shows that there's no ego there, because it's Our Lady Peace that founded this festival, yet you have the Smashing Pumpkins as the headliner. And I remember it was the Smashing Pumpkins that headlined at that show in Ottawa.
Yeah, they headlined all of them just because that was the way we wanted it. And I just remember, if it's, we were always, we always preferred to be the second last band anyway. We headlined Edgefest and swapped out with the Tea Party. We wanted, they'll probably say, I'm sure Jeff would say, no, we were always supposed to headline that. But we realized that to be the last band at a festival is not the best slot. It's always the one right before it, because everyone's still there. Because when you play the headlining slot, doesn't matter if it's a festival, say Molson Park or something, where it's 40,000 people. It really doesn't matter who the last band is. A lot of people are trying to just get home at that point, right? So you're just seeing you're playing to the brake lights as everybody's getting out.
The mass exodus, yeah.
Even the Lollapaloozas, like I saw the 94 with Alice in Chains, and Primus was on after Alice in Chains. It's almost like the last band was, no matter who you were, like there's the mass exodus happening while you're out there, just because there's a percentage of people who don't care. They've been there for 12 hours. It doesn't matter who it is. They're going home. So we always thought that's fine. If you want to headline, perfect. That's great for us, always.
So 12 years later, on March 30th of 2012, I saw you guys at the Bronson Center in Ottawa. This was a part of the Juno Award weekend. And at the time, I was an intern at Warner Music and Publishing. So I was able to get a few VIP passes. And I'm going to share another picture that I think you'll enjoy here. I was able to dig this up. So we actually have a picture together here, if you can see this. So the Bronson Center, that's my friend Selj, who was able to dig up this picture. You can see the quality of pictures from a phone. It's not what it is today, a little blurry there. But that's an intimate show at the Bronson Center. And then I have one more picture to share that I think you'll get a kick out of. So I saw you guys again at Edgefest in Toronto, August 16th, 2014. This is with Sloan, I Mother Earth, and Eve 6, a great quadruple bill. And there was a torrential downpour before you guys played. And let me just get this picture up here real quick. Almost ready. Okay, so this is Edgefest. Torrential downpour is happening. And here's my friends and I trying to survive the torrential downpour. Can you see this picture? This is outside.
Oh, yeah.
This is
nice.
Us in front of the stage. Before
you look pretty prepared to me, though, with the ponchos.
Ponchos, baby. We were ready for like a tornado. We were ready for anything.
Yeah. For a sec, I thought the buddy on the left had a like a Captain Highliner hat on, but no, it's just a straight up.
Yeah, it looks like Puma or something. So, and the last thing for kind of our history is that a few episodes ago on the podcast, I had drum wizard Jordan Gauthier for a 2-hour deep dive. And I asked him, we were talking about manufacturing drums. And I said, what is like the average amount of time you need to manufacture a drum kit? And he goes, well, normally like 2 to 3 weeks. But he goes, let me tell you the shortest amount of time that it takes, because I've done it once. And he shared a story with you that he only had, I don't know, 2 days or 3 days, and he built a drum kit from scratch. And I was able to share that clip with you. And that's where we became, we ended up in the same orbit, which led to this interview here. So, yeah,
well, this is the bass drum right here. And the rest of it's around. But he built this little travel kit for me in a couple days. And, I kind of threw it out there like, hey, if he can do it, great. If not, I probably thought in my head, like, there's no way he's going to be able to do this. but he did. And because, there were shallow drums, a single headed floor tom, and so they all fit into each other. So they're smaller, but still amazing job. Jordo's one of the best in the world. And he's a great a bod, as we call him. And yeah, thankful that he's around to do that for me. It was amazing.
You threw out a Hail Mary pass and
I did.
he actually came through with it. And I actually had to ask him because he said, oh yeah, I manufactured, I think he called it like a travel kit or something like that. And I said, what exactly makes it a travel kit? And it's what you explained, that it's smaller, it fits better on planes, they fit within each other.
Yeah, it's a kit that you can put into one size and roll out. So yeah, it's awesome. Really cool.
So people look at you today and they see all the success that you've had over the years, multi-platinum with Our Lady Peace, the podcast, best-selling book, tours, all this stuff. I like to go back to the beginning to show that you didn't finish, you weren't a finished product. You started with this young kid with a dream that had a vision and a lot of hard work and ups and downs. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning, starting with your earliest musical memory. But before that, I was excited for this episode, so I wanted to kick this off powerfully. So I reached out to one of the most important people in Our Lady Peace's history, and I got some kind words here from the one and only Arnold Lanni. So he produced the first 4 Our Lady Peace albums. He's produced Finger 11, Simple Plan, 1,000-Foot Crutch, and he sent in not only some kind words, but some behind-the-scenes stories that I think you'll enjoy. So this is from Arnold Lanni. He says, I have so many wonderful memories from my time with Our Lady Peace that it's hard to highlight only a few. I'm really proud of all the great music we made together, so I'm always happy to reflect back on those amazing times. I remember the day Jeremy came to the studio to audition for the band. He might have been maybe 16 or 17 years old, just a teenager. After jamming for only a few bars, I remember feeling this wild excitement because I knew we'd found our drummer and heartbeat for the band. He was just pure joy and innocence, unbridled by convention. He loved to laugh and he loved drumming. We'd often talk about old jazz players and classic swing drummers, and I just remembered him having a beautiful old soul for such a young person. His youthful energy in the band was infectious and contagious. When we were doing pre-production for the record, sometimes things would get a little heated or tense, but Jeremy would always find a way to crack the guys up with a practical joke or a prank, and suddenly there'd be no more stress. He was a fun spirit, a glass half full type of kid. I also remember how much he loved baseball. So you mentioned this earlier. Him and the guys would pick up tennis balls, then go outside and start pitching some serious heat. They always had a bet riding on something, just hilarious. There'd be contests or competitions, like who could pitch the most strikes, who could tolerate the most pitches to their nuts. And then they'd start getting into even funnier outside stuff, like who could eat the grossest things without throwing up. They would always try to outdo each other with their craziest practical joke or prank, just constant crazy stuff. Honestly, in the beginning, it was a lot like a frat house. The whole time was like like the movie Animal House, just fun and nutty. I had the best time hanging out and working with all those guys. It was a privilege for me to be able to watch guys like Jeremy, who joined the band as a young teenager and then developed and evolved into a premier drummer. It was an awesome time. Anyway, that's all for now. It's been a while since I last saw Jeremy. I hope all is great in his life. Please give him my absolute best, and I wish you both good health and happiness. Bye for now, Arnold.
That's very nice of him. That's good recollection of those days. And that really was, because the band, it wasn't like they were around for years as a band. Like we were all kind of, once I joined, we started writing Naveed and getting together, and that's it. We became a band. So with becoming a band is all that stuff, like the stupid contests and the punching each other in the arm to see it, just like the dumbest stuff, because you're stuck in a room with 3 other people, 5 including Arnold, all the time, all day, for 7 days a week. And when you're trying to do a record on a small budget, because Sony didn't give us the world, they just kind of gave us like a a 7 album deal, but each of those albums, it started out as like a, not like kind of like indie records, as opposed to, well, huge budgets compared to now, but back then, not the amount where you can just block book a studio for 6 months and go in and enjoy yourself. So we tried to get as much done as we could, but we were also learning, and we were all first timers in the big idea of what an album would be. So there was a lot of learning going on, and there was a lot of stress and tension. So there was, constantly like a crock pot every day would heat up, and then it would have to blast off. And we came up with a lot of crazy ideas to get that combusting.
You mentioned that was a 7 album deal. That's wild when you think that, usually a band puts out an album every 2 years, sometimes every 3 years. Like that's like a 15-year contract. So that's a big commitment.
Well, at that time, if you think, it was, I guess, 1993. So there was grunge was already happening, and labels were getting crazy like that. They were, I remember the Sloan deal with Geffen. It was like everybody was trying to find the next big thing, and they would dangle the carrots, and that was generally the biggest thing, was like a long-term deal is what you want with the band. But that, to be honest, it doesn't really mean anything. Even you could have a 7 album deal, and if you're not selling any records, you get thrown away. So, but we thought that was better than, going for one big advance or something like that. So, labels were crazy at that time. They were throwing everything and everything. I remember Junk House was a big signing for Sony at the time. So we went to their album release party, and it was literally $100,000 party.
Wow.
Just the one night.
That doesn't happen anymore.
Oh, it was crazy. Like it was like Cirque du Soleil when you walk into this party, and I'm sure Junk House were like, Tom was like, yo, we have to fucking pay for this or what? Like, because it was just ridiculous. And back then labels were nuts, man. The money was just like, and that was, promo budgets were just through the roof.
So we're going to take a legit deep dive into Naveed in a little bit. We're going to work our way up. So let's go back to where does this love of music come from? Is there an actual earliest musical memory that comes to you right now?
Well, my father was a jazz drummer in the Yorkville scene in the 60s. So I grew up with hearing music in the house all the time. My mother loved the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and so there was always records, great vinyl records being spun all the time. My dad loved jazz and John Coltrane and Charlie Parker. And so he would blast crazy music either in the radio in the car or whatever he could find on the radio in the house. So I do remember music being a huge part of my life as a kid. And but I didn't start playing drums until I was 14. So it's a kind of an interesting story. Like I loved music, and always, even when I was a young kid, I saw another drummer at my school play drums. And I should preface before this, my father quit drumming in 1979. So when I was 4 years old, he didn't get a gig for a New Year's show and literally destroyed his drum set in the basement and was like, I'm finished. I'm not doing it anymore. And that's the end of it. So it was very traumatic, to be honest, because I still remember the noise of the sound of him destroying stuff in the basement. Like we're talking about the shells being destroyed, the cymbals all cracked to bits. Like,
did he take a sledgehammer to it? Like what? How did?
No, all with his hands, smashing things on top of things.
It's a passionate man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd seen that anger way too many times. But so I grew up without seeing drums, and that, like, he destroyed them all and threw everything away, not even a set of sticks. So one time when I was 14 years old, and I was going to school in Barrie, living in Barrie at the time, Ontario, and I was walking up Innisfil Street to our place, right past the Hour Dry Cleaners, and the back parking lot of the little three floor complex building. there was a set of taped up rim shot drumsticks that were broken like in a bunch of places, but taped up with that crappy clear tape, like when you don't have other kind of tape, that tape. So there are 2 sticks just wrapped like crazy. And I went upstairs and my dad was home and I was like, "Hey Dad, look at these." And he looked at me like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Right? Like, because at the time we were working on baseball and I was playing rep baseball and loved baseball. And that was all I practiced my dad every single day. That was his passion with me, was baseball. And so when he saw these drumsticks, he was mad at me. He's like, "What the fuck are those? Like, come on." And I was like, "I want to learn how to do it." He's like, "Oh Christ." He was upset. I said, "No, I really want to try this out." And he brought this rubber practice pad from work. He worked at Rexdale Sears in the warehouse. He was in maintenance, and he grabbed this piece of foam, really thick industrial foam rubber, and he put it over a book and he taped that together and put it together. And it was like a legit practice pad. And he said to me, he's like, "When you can wear a hole through this to the book, you can get a set of drums." So I literally like started practicing like crazy, but he got into it too. So he was practicing too on the same pad. So he kind of helped me, but I got down to that book and I got the shittiest set of drums you could find. Literally, like the guy ripped us off style, like just a crappy old set of drums without shells, like just wood that had been like painted with a brush, as opposed to like a wrap or something on them. They're just garbage old pieces from other drum sets. But I was happy enough to have an actual drum kit. And my dad he said, "Listen, if you're going to do this, you have to, you can't just be better than your neighbor downstairs." He's like, "You got to pick heroes and try and play as well as those guys, or fuck it. Like, don't bother unless you can do what you hear on these records." Right. And I was like, I don't care. I was so into it. And I was so into, he really kind of gave me a great idea of what it is to be a musician, like the idea of a musician. He didn't give me any discussion on fame or money or women or any of that stuff. It was all about the craft and getting good at that. And that's all that matters. And I think that's what gave me a leg up, was really just kind of finding it in the dirt and going into the rehearsal space and practicing for literally 12 hours a day. My high school fell apart. I got kicked out of Emory High School because I was practicing all the time. But my parents were kind of so upset that I stopped playing baseball by the time I was around 16 that they kind of gave up on whatever the fuck I was going to do. So there was that rebellious kind of stuff that happened, but at least it was that age at 16 when they thought I was just going to be some guy who wants to be a musician in Toronto, probably going to end up not doing anything.
There's no guarantees in music, that's for sure.
Yeah, not at all. Right. So, and they didn't know what the hell with my other brother. My oldest brother was getting into trouble at the time and drinking. So they're like, we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment on Weston Road with like my 2 brothers. And so what, my parents were sleeping on a mattress in the living room every night. So it was getting to the point where like, well, fuck, God, who gives a shit? Because look where we are here. So it was a nice turnaround between that bleak period at 16 and then, being in Our Lady Peace a couple years later, touring and actually making a little bit of money to help this situation back where I was at home. So that's a whole other part of the beginning of Our Lady Peace that my world that people probably don't really realize.
So your dad mentioned that if you want to be great, you got to study the greats. So who are your drum your biggest drum influences back at that time, 14, 15, 16, when you were starting?
So for me, it was his heroes, which was like Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, Alvin Jones, and just like all really kind of the heavy jazz folks from the 40s and 50s. And so I got really, just that was the path that I kind of wanted to take, was with jazz. And Alvin Jones was, ever since I was very young, was a kind of a, even my older brother loved Alvin Jones, James. Like, so there was, before I liked him. So there was a connection with just that chaotic intrigue when you don't know what, say, John Coltrane or something, you listen to it, it sounds like very chaotic and intense, and takes a long time as a listener just to try and get into it. Like my wife still can't stand that kind of music, where she just like, it's too intense. So
it's like controlled chaos.
Yeah, it's kind of like people that really like maybe like death metal or something like that, where it's very intense. But I find anyway, just that I find that kind of music, just there's zero mistakes happening with, for example, on A Love Supreme. It sounds chaos and crazy, but they're so connected on so many different levels that it's the complete opposite of chaos. It's actually so controlled, based on emotion, as opposed to like, okay, this is the arrangement, we're doing this, this, and this. It's just, okay, we're going to connect on this level, but we're still going to be like pushing the boundaries, but everybody's still in time and in the same key and all that shit. So anyway, I think by listening to that kind of stuff, I always was intrigued by musicians that were different and interesting. So Keith Moon and John Bonham, like hearing Zeppelin and the Who and a lot of the English drummers that had that kind of reckless abandon, but also like very together, swingy, kind of strong feel. Those were the other things that I started to get into, as opposed to what my dad was listening to. So I ended up just really kind of finding favorite records, but getting super into like idolizing Keith Moon and idolizing John Bonham and just trying to, I guess, when you listen to those records, it's most important to find out who their influences were. And it was always generally like Bonham loved Krupa and Buddy Rich and Alvin as well. Like mostly that's those guys from the 40s, and the band leader drummers were really kind of set the tone for what rock and roll, blues, all that stuff was going to be. And obviously the Black cultural music in Southern America, that was everything too. Like that was where everything started so clearly, outside of, African music and Brazilian music, and culturally, there's always this very strong surge of passionate, legitimate, hardcore, like time and groove. Right. So I just got connected into that stuff, like just really finding out who people listen to and what did they like, and asking questions. If I met drummers, I started taking lessons. I studied with my father showed me a lot of things, but I studied with Rick Gratton in Toronto, Paul DeLong, another great drummer, who played with Kim Mitchell, Vito Rezza, another amazing jazz drummer from Toronto. So just, I would go to clinics, and I was like hanging out at Just Drums 10 hours a day, where they're like, get out of here, kids, because I was watching all the instructional videos for free, right? So yeah, just being broke and like trying to find out your way around things for free.
You're like the person that goes into chapters and reads the books while they're there.
The only thing I could afford was the $15 for a drum lesson every week, and getting to and from on the bus. Other than that, it was like trying to find. I had my buddy Joe Yanuzzi in high school. We used to just like go hang out with cover bands, or we had other Mike uh, Mike Siracusa was another jobbing drummer that kind of helped me out because he was a lot older too. So I would go with all these guys and watch them play in their cover bands and sit in and stuff. So I just really wanted to become, going back to what my dad was saying, just like a musician purely, as opposed to what fame was, or being a rock star, all that bullshit. And I think when I had my first meeting, when the audition with Our Lady Peace, they felt that, the honesty and what I was trying to do. Like, I really thought that, well, I'm not expecting some gig that's going to play in arenas and tour the world. I was fully understanding that, like, it might be a hotel lobby or a cruise ship if I'm lucky, but those gigs are attainable. They're not like, it's not impossible to get those, so that was a reality, and I was okay with that as a drummer starting out. I was like, well, that's what drumming is, and most musicians mostly play those kind of gigs. They don't play arenas, and once in a while they'll get a gig that does well, but a lot of the times they're playing clubs and they're just continuing their craft and taking what they can get, but literally being professional musicians. That's most musicians.
So let's dive into those early days of Our Lady Peace. So in 1993, Our Lady Peace's original drummer leaves the band. They hold auditions. Apparently there was like 100 drummers that auditioned, and you got the gig. Rumor has it you were like 17 or so at that time. How did you even hear about that audition to start with? And how wild is it that you only started playing drums at 14 and you get that gig at 17? I mean, that's pretty wild.
It has a lot to do with, like I said, the practicing curve. When my dad's saying, look, if you're going to do this, go practice. And there's nothing in between you and getting that done other than practicing. And that's what I did for 3 years, literally 12 hours a day. You can ask the guys at Rumblefish Studios, where I did a lot of that practicing. Dave Caravaggio, the guy who ran the place, he knew I was in there all making noise. Vito Rezza, Mike Siracusa, those guys had rooms in there and they could just hear the noise constantly. It was probably shit most of the time, but like, it started. I remember Vito one time knocked on the door and it's like, hey man, it's starting to sound solid in there. So like,
it's starting to sound like drumming.
Yeah, like I remember the transition, and it's just knowing it was about sweating it out. And like my drum set had this massive like sawdust around the whole thing, like just drumsticks broken all over the place. So that was it. It was just practicing. But you asked another part of the question.
Yeah,
right?
just how did you hear about that audition? How did you even know they were looking?
Now magazine, just musicians want.
Wow.
I would always look at the Now magazine at the back, and it was like, yeah, it was literally band with deal seeks drummer. And that's like, how do you get 100 drummers to show up at your thing? Say you have a deal, right?
And they weren't even Our Lady Peace yet, right? They had a different name.
They just were Our Lady Peace for a couple of months, and they had made a demo that got them a deal with Sony. So even when I was there, like the deal was just still being done. I remember signing the final deal with, like, after all the initial signing. So it was literally like, I think the deal was probably signed in April of '93 or something like that, and that's literally when I joined. Right before my birthday.
So that's in 1993. A year later, Naveed comes out in 1994. 5 singles: The Birdman, Starseed, Hope, Super Satellite, Naveed. This goes 4 times platinum in Canada, 1 million copies sold in the US. So that all sounds incredible, but it didn't actually explode out of the gate with that success. Apparently, it was a little bit of a slow burner at the start. Is that true?
Very true. Yeah, it worked out perfectly in terms of giving us the opportunity to evolve as a band live, because I mean, our first show in '93, like, we played some shows with the Tea Party in Quebec, and our buddy DJ Williams was like a young promoter, and he was doing these kind of residential tours of Quebec, which was great for a band, because if you could break in all these small cities throughout Quebec, then you know, it was a lot easier to well, firstly, like Music Plus would start playing a band that had a little buzz in Quebec. So the Tea Party had great success in Quebec before anywhere else. And actually you can look years later to like the Backstreet Boys. Like they did the same thing. They got popular on Music Plus before anything ever happened in the world. So it really is a thing. If you can start to, because Quebec, the market is so intense and the fans are so hardcore, you can sell a lot of records quickly. I'm not sure if it's the same right now, but back then, like you could have literally a career in Quebec, a great career. So we did shows with the Tea Party, like in places like Jonquière and Sherbrooke and Trois-Rivières and all, you know, these smaller cities throughout Quebec, and building a following. I mean, our first show with Tea Party, though, like our first live show, we were terrible. We had to stop like halfway. It was at Backstreet in Montreal. Mitch Joel was there. He's a good old friend of the band. We literally had to stop, like, because I think at one point, two of us in the band were playing different songs. Like, got like, I don't know what happened, but it was like Naveed and something else was happening, and I remember like the two Jeffs and Stuart from Tea Party were at like side stage watching this absolute train wreck happen, right?
And they're a great live band, so there'd be like a juxtaposition between the two, you know.
So yeah, I mean, we probably got through a couple songs that were decent, but then we sucked so bad at the Naveed or whatever it was that we actually got off the stage, and like, well, that was the end of the show. It was interesting, and it ended up being great because it was so bad that nothing could be worse than what just happened. So I think we played in Quebec City the next night, and it was like we played the whole set, and it felt like we rocked it just by the idea of accomplishing the goal that we had. So we really learned a lot in that first year, and the fact that, you know, we had reasonable success, but not like, we weren't like a buzz clip on Much Music. It wasn't in heavy rotation at Much Music. It was kind of just a little bit. Like at that time, bands like Moist, you know, they were, and Tea Party too, were having huge success at Much. So it wasn't until the next year when Starseed started getting played on K-Rock in LA and doing some action in America, that was when the absolute nuclear bomb went off. Because it was like, that's classic Canadianity, is when you
have to go elsewhere. Yeah.
Some success starts to happen somewhere else, and then, oh, wait a second, all the journalists,
our very own, our very own Canadian band.
They get in line, and then they start talking about, hey, wait a second, that's ours, we know them. So that really happened times 10, and we had a buzz clip or heavy rotation on Much from that moment forward. And I think we were on because we were on like Naveed, I think, was the single. Like, so it was our third single or something in Canada, where we were having reasonable success and playing 1,500 people a night, sold out and kind of growing. But once that happened, it was like the buzz. Once we start getting the full rotation on Naveed, that was really when it started to kick. And it's actually cool because that song, the fact that was our first big hit in Canada on radio and stuff, and it's such a different kind of song. Like, that's not a typical hit song. It's very kind of slow and really it kind of grows on you. So the fact that it happened that way was so perfect, because literally we went from playing packed clubs to like, who knows what we could have done even at the end of that year. We ended up waiting and then going out with Alanis on the Jagged Little Pill tour. So by the time we were Clumsy was recorded, we were in arenas, you know. So it just happened quickly, but it was a really nice build. So Canada got to know us in a great way. So by the time Clumsy came out, every kid in that demographic of I don't know, like 8 to 20, like if the same as the Spice Girls demographic, was listening to us. And it was really like lightning in a bottle that next couple years.
So you were just 18 when that album comes out. Was it overwhelming being that young and having that much success? Or do you think that gradual rise over that year helped? And maybe if you exploded right out of the gate,
Yeah,
it would have been too much.
yeah, I think so. Like I think if we were like that, if it was the same hit impact we would had, we wouldn't have had that year to develop as a band. We wouldn't have been as good live. And we toured Canada probably 5 times in a row, like just back and forth in our little van, our school bus van. So that really got us the sea legs up, and we were ready for anything. Actually, because we worked our asses off and literally didn't take time off and just kept working on our show. I felt that we were one of the best bands in Canada at the time anyway. So, it was perfect. It's the same thing. It's like with drumming for me, it's like when you put in the work, you kind of expect it at that point, because we were really a great live band at that point.
What was it like hearing your songs on the radio for the first time with the singles off of that album?
It was pretty cool. Like I still remember hearing the first time on Much Music and the first time on 102.1, and even back then Q107 were playing new music in Toronto. So to hear that was great. Like it was really cool. But again, like once you start really working and your peers become the same bands that are doing that stuff, like you expect it and you want more. So that kind of eventually pushed you. And we, when you're young and you start to have that success, next thing you know, you're looking at radio reports in every market that your songs are being played, just because it's happening. It's like I don't know, you just get interested in, because you're involved. All of a sudden you're looking at radio reports, and then you're getting this heavy rotation at all these markets in America. And then when that stops to happen, that's when it starts to fuck with you. Like when you start thinking like, now you're working for an A&R in a record company. Like it just, when you're in it, you start getting in, that generates the interest. But then when it changes, it's kind of fucks with you. So, all those things happened 1996, 7, 8, like, because the stars aligned in Canada, but didn't quite align in America the same way. And, even Columbia Records, like Donnie Ienner wished that they had the first album. He felt that they could have made it so much bigger but it was on Relativity in America, which was like kind of like a hip hop label right at the time. Like Bone Thugs were the biggest thing.
You needed to add some hip hop beats to that album.
Yeah, exactly. No, but just the marketing was like an indie marketing compared to a major marketing. So like what Columbia could have done with Starseed compared to Relativity, what they did, that was the biggest thing, because Donnie Ienner wanted Starseed to happen again. And he loved that song so much. And that was one of those songs that was never going to happen again. Like you can't really write a song like that. We tried, believe me, OLP fucking tried to get that same energy again, but it's just the beauty of songwriting when you're a young band. Some stuff just happens and other stuff just, it ends up sounding forced. Because why? Because you're trying to fucking do something that's already there. That's impossible. It really is impossible to, unless you're, writing formulated country songs, it's impossible to create a song that impacts, like It Smells Like Teen Spirit, or a fucking, Black Hole Sun, or, a song that just like a song that if you try to copy it, it sounds like a shit song every time.
Yeah, it's capturing lightning in a bottle. You just can't do it on purpose. Yeah,
for sure. So you know, and that happens too when you're a band and you first start, and it happens, and you have the what ifs, and so you try to counter the what ifs on the next record, and of course it never happens that way. So you're always guaranteed to create tension on your own accord by creating these things that shouldn't really exist in the first place. You know, you should continue that mindset of why you're making music in that room on the first album, and just keeping that vibe. And we, you know, the songs that were like that, like that were different and had their own thing, were always the singles that ended up becoming, you know, the ones that stick around. Or they're individual in their own way. They're not like, hey, this one's like this one. Those songs never ever work.
So once you confirmed that you were coming on the podcast as a guest, I put out the bat signal to the Jeremy Taggart fans, to the Our Lady Peace fans, to send in their questions. So I have fan questions that were sent in droves. I'm going to sprinkle them through the interview here. And the first fan question is from Daryl Surgeoner. And his question is, if you had your dream pick of musicians to form a super group, who would they be and why? So I guess you would be on drums, I would assume.
Yeah, because I want to play
with them. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I want this to be like, if when you make these kind of decisions, you want to make them quick first, because I could pick 4 people and that could be different tomorrow or different in a half an hour from now, you know?
Right. It depends what sound you're going for. Like,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
tough.
So, I mean, it's easy, you know, I could say, you know, James Jamerson on bass, but it's like, you know, then it's like, it's just what I want to play. I just want to play like time.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, or, you know, if you're like Jaco Pastorius, or if you want to go like singer songwritery, you know, like, I don't know, like Adam Clayton, you know, like from U2. Like, there's all kinds of different routes when you're thinking musicians, right? There's like the person who just is going to play something and you're going to want to jump on top of it. And then there's the person that you want to play something and they're going to play something to change what you're playing. So it's hard.
This might be the hardest question of the whole interview.
Yeah, it really is. Because that's what happens in my head when I think about it. Because when you're putting a band together, it depends on what you're trying to do, what kind of music you're trying to make. But I don't know, Jimmy Garrison maybe from Coltrane, because I'd like to see how much he'd tell me to go fuck myself.
These are very strange reasons to choose musicians.
You know what I mean? Because that's the other thing. Like, you're picking these legends, and they're like, "Okay, man, let's get it going." And they're like, "Get the fuck out of here, dude."
So I
don't know. That's too tough, you know.
That's tough. We'll just stick with, you gave a few names, so then we'll go with those, and we'll let that band mash up however it mashes up.
Bunch of bass players.
Yeah, one drummer and 3 bass players. Hey, it's your band. This is Fantasy Island, and you can do whatever you want. That's awesome. So in preparation for this interview, I went back, I listened to the entire 8-album discography that you have with Our Lady Peace. And awesome. When listening to Naveed, the snare sound on Julia, man, it's so snappy and piercing and badass. Can you give any insight into how you captured that sound? So the drums sound amazing on the entire album, but for some reason on Julia, I don't know if it's like really how hard you're hitting or if there's something different going on.
It could be also there's the start of it, which is a big snare fill, and then there's the big building snare fill, right? And so that's probably the biggest reason, that like how it starts, and then
but I think even when you're all the way in, that snare is just ridiculous.
I'm really pounding the snare in that to the point where I'm injuring myself. So I would say the compression for one thing, and just probably playing very loud. And I don't know, maybe that song, I was able to play louder. This was my first time. I had a really tough time recording on the first album because I was playing louder than I had to, so I didn't understand dynamics at all. And so I was just learning how to try and keep control. And Julia, I think, was more in my ballpark of groove. So because I could play it easier, I'm probably just crushing it.
So I have some kind words sent in from someone that was there all the way in the beginning before the band even had that record deal. This person was involved in the recording of the demos, was involved with the first two Our Lady Peace albums. So I have some kind words from Terry Sawchuk. So
I love Terry.
So he helped engineer the first two Our Lady Peace albums. He's gone on to have tremendous success with Alanis Morissette, Matt Dusk, Jake Owen. And this is what Terry has to say. Let me set this up. He says, Jeremy was a total anomaly. He was a world-class drummer at 18 and gave up an invitation to try out as a pitcher for the Atlanta Braves or their farm team to pursue music. A AAA pitcher in Toronto at age 16. He pitched 8 hours a day with his dad. He and I were playing catch outside the studio while recording Clumsy. He threw me a few fastballs, and I took the glove off and said, I'm done, LOL. Here's an important thing to mention about Jeremy. Our Lady Peace only had one guitar player in Mike Turner, but they still needed a big rock sound. He created a sound with a hoppy snare drum style that filled in almost as a rhythmical hook and paying homage to his love of jazz. It gave the band a more multi-dimensional sound. We compressed the snare, you mentioned that, with a slow attack and a long release to give it the ring to feature it. He hits harder than a tank, and it created a very signature sound. When I think of OLP's sound, I think of him. Ask him to tell you about playing with Brian Johnson of AC/DC and Brian's comments on how hard he hit the snare. Jeremy is a man of true integrity and passion for creating. His sense of humor and wit is intoxicating. I remember that he was very close to his family, and when Clumsy broke, he bought his parents their first home. That's from Terry Sawchuk.
Love Terry. Yeah, those are true words. Yeah, the Brian Johnson story is great because it was actually Johnny Damon's wedding. You know, the year that they won, the Red Sox won and broke the curse, right? So it was like 2004. And so it was already crazy that, you know, having all the Red Sox at this party and at his wedding, and Brian Johnson standing there, and he's literally wearing like a black t-shirt and jeans. Everyone's wearing tuxedos and suits, and he says, "Oh, my luggage got lost," but it's like bullshit. You're just
never change. Never change.
And you're dressed. That's how you dress, right? So I don't know. I was drinking, and I was like, "Hey, Brian, let's there's a band playing. You want to sit in and play Back in Black with us?" And because it was guys from American Hi-Fi and Letters to Cleo, so like Drew and Jamie and Mike Eisenstein, so great musicians and a literal, you know, a wicked band, and they all know Back in Black. So I asked him, and he literally is like, "Oh, Back in Black, I don't know how to fucking the lyrics of that one." And so he's like trying to sing the lyrics. He's like, "Back in Black, I hit the sack." He's literally going through the words at this wedding ceremony, whatever, like hanging out, and he's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do it." And he gets up there, and we start the song, and he turns around and he grabs, looking right at me, and he grabs his balls, and he's and I was like, right on. And after the song, I go up to him. I was like, "Oh, that was crazy." Like, "Oh, I love it when it's tight. It's so fucking tight up
there." That's how he shows his approval. Is a good crotch grab. Yeah.
He loved it. So yeah, Terry, thanks for those words. That's very nice.
So I have one final question about Naveed, and then we'll move on to Clumsy. After the album goes 4 times platinum, are you thinking that there's nowhere to go but down after that? I mean, 4 times platinum is ridiculous. Most bands don't have that much success. Are you thinking like, how can you possibly have more success than that with an album that it's probably downhill after this?
I don't think so, because we knew at that point, like, our fan base was growing. and had grown exponentially since we were doing like 1,500 people, and at that point they were selling out in minutes. So we knew the next run was going to be big, based on doing the Jagged Little Pill tour and the success that, like, a lot of people saw us from that, and younger people too, obviously, like Alanis. It was all like kids and young girls specifically that were just enamored with her, right? So that was a huge tour for us, because it was like all the people that didn't know us, but all the people that did know us were collecting along too. So I think we were expecting, because also we thought that the record was good. Like, we thought that Superman was a great song and Clumsy was going to be a great song. And I mean, those songs, man, they were all like,
they're undeniable.
We were fans at that time of very popular universal music, so like bands like Garbage and Radiohead, and like all those records that were coming out in 1996. And we were listening to that stuff so much. And I think we just really designed that record, even though they were kind of interesting in the individual songs. We were kind of tapering them to the hits that were at, like the for example, like, Wonderwall and Superman don't sound similar for no reason. You know what I mean? Or like God Was One of Us and Clumsy kind of sound similar for a reason. Like, if you think of like there's elements of those songs that were like, yeah, we feel these are ready for radio. And it really was kind of turnkey. As soon as that record came out, it just started selling like 20,000 records a week for like 8, 9, 10 months after that. It was just ridiculous.
So Clumsy comes out in 1997, 5 singles: Superman's Dead, Clumsy, Automatic Flowers, Carnival, 4 a.m. All 5 of those are like undeniable hits when you hear them. And before I start the questions for this album, I have to go over some of the accolades, because this is ridiculous. It goes diamond in Canada, which is 10 times platinum, or 1 million copies sold.
Here.
What's going on? You're taking off?
No, look. I got right here. Here's the Diamond Clumsy Award. See, it's nice and thick.
Oh man, that is, maybe it's 10 times thicker than the normal plaque there with the
yeah, no, it's pretty rad for sure.
So diamond in Canada, 1 million copies sold, 10 times platinum. It sells another 1 million in the US. It is only, I mentioned this in the promo for this interview, that it's only one, it's just one of 3 Canadian bands that have a diamond album alongside the Bare Naked Ladies and the Tragically Hip. I mean, that what better company can you be in with those 3? And for the 20 years between 1996 and 2016, Clumsy was the single best-selling album in Canada by a Canadian band. There's no album in a 20-year period in Canada that outsold that, which is, I mean, that's the top 1% of 1%. A couple more things. Radio station The Edge 102 said it's it's the number 1 album in 1997 based on sales, listener requests for songs, and votes for the top album at the end. And then it's on the list of top 100 Canadian albums of all time. Number 3 on The Edge, their top 102 rock albums of all time. So all of this, I'm building a picture here to say that almost no human being will ever experience that level of success with their music and their band. Can you try to put into words what your life was like during that ridiculous juggernaut of an album?
Controlled chaos, again, because we expected that stuff. So then you're getting into like megalomania, I guess, like a postured reality. All of those things start to kick in when you have that kind of success. You start to think that things that aren't true. You kind of lose it a little bit, because it's just so intense. And like you said, it was, the fire in Canada, the flash of that pan was like insane. So Yeah, it was it affected us all, and I don't, in ways that probably, changed us for sure, definitely. Yeah, it was impact where, you're kind of like it I felt like I was uncentered all of a sudden in a way, but it was incredible. I remember being on tour, and all of a sudden we're playing in arenas with 2 tour buses, and I remember our bus driver Jim Boatman laughing and looking at me, and I was like, he was just from Nashville, just this classic dude. At the time he was in his 60s and had been with everybody from Soundgarden to Willie Nelson, and was in a barbershop quartet with himself as a singer in the 50s. And we're playing this huge tour and big places packed beyond. And he's laughing at me, and I'm like, what's so funny? He's like, ah. I'm like, what's so funny? He's like, you don't even know what's going on. You don't even know that this is the peak of your whole existence. You don't even know anything. He just got more. He thought it was more funny the more I asked him, what do you mean? He started dying, right? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm like trying to justify the reason for these, 20,000 sellouts that happened in minutes. And he's just laughing harder and harder because he knew that I thought that it was like, no, it's based on like the work and we're doing all this stuff. And he's like, he's good, like he's crying, and now I get it, like,
do you think that you were so close to it that you couldn't actually see how big that was?
When you're so close to it like that, you think you have a hand in the manufacturing of it. Like, you think that, well, this is because we tried to do this, and that's not true at all. You do what you can, but eventually when it gets to that level, that's like there's no manufacturing going on. It's just you kind of hang on and ride it, right?
Do you think that was the perfect storm of, you had a great album with undeniable singles, you had been building since the last album, so there was this fan base that was underneath that, you had a record label that after the 4 times platinum of the first album was ready to sink some investments into this album, that the landscape of radio at that time, it was perfect with what people were listening to. Like, it's just a perfect storm that came through in 97.
Yeah, well, we had Columbia Records, their full staff, so that again, and obviously, even though we didn't have the hipster success of Starseed getting on the K-Rocks and the 99Xs, with the second record, it was big across every form. Not to mention, we did the Van Halen tour that in 95, and that really helped radio for us across the Midwest of America. So we had a lot of success by going in and shaking hands the first time around. So by having Columbia on it with a bigger staff, and all these radio stations probably felt that too. Like, oh, okay, here, this is the same band that came in with Relativity, but now you feel the difference. So again, by that American power that was happening, the Canadians were just like double the time in and around the fence, because they're like, oh yeah, they're from here, we did this. Right? So there's that happening times 10. So that definitely was the perfect storm. We just kind of wished that we'd had more success in America that would have, pushed, because we were doing well in certain areas of Europe. So in our mind, we're like, well, we're trying to do this, but we're also trying to build in Europe, and certain, like Germany was good, and London and France was good, but we wanted to try and build out in other markets there too. So you're always trying to think of where things aren't happening, and you want them to be happening there. So there was the perfect storm, but it made sense a little bit at the time to think that, like, well, we can take this up a notch, because you see bands like Green Day or whatever other huge band that goes huge in America, but then it goes and it goes, and it's just, 50 times bigger, you know what I mean? So we were so close to like, well, okay, we're going to get to that point where it's like, 30,000 records a week in America, and then things start popping everywhere else. But that was the mindset with like when you're hoping to crack that next level of the band to see if you can do that. Because the most important thing at that time was, we were playing arenas, but we had a great live act. Like the show was banging at that time, and it sounded great, and we had great lights, and the production was fantastic. So we were definitely firing on all cylinders, and we didn't shortchange anybody,
So I was 12 years old when that album comes out, and I have an older sister, and I remember at 12 years old sneaking into her room. She had a tower of CDs. I sneak in, I grab this album. It was Our Lady Peace Clumsy. I put it in. First song is Superman's Dead. And I remember being like overwhelmed. I loved it, but I had no idea what I was listening to because it was so unique. The hoo parts, the alone, 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 the why, like that. It's so unique. There's no other band that sounds like that. And I remember it was like a huge music moment for me where I knew I loved it, but I couldn't grasp. I had never heard anything like it. So I couldn't put it in a box with anything else. So that moment stood out to me. And that's like my first taste of Our Lady Peace. And I had a question about that music video. So there's a little boy in that video, and this is Ryan Dennis, who goes on to have success with Serial Joe, gold album, successful singles. Was it cool to see that little boy in that video go on to have success later on? And how did he end up in that video to start with?
Yeah, well, George Vale, the director of that video, we were there for the audition when Ryan auditioned, and we just thought it was interesting that the concept where it's a boy or a girl. That was kind of the idea of the video, and it just being there to see his audition. He was really had a lot of emotion, so we were like, "This is great." And that video was so popular that he literally got a career out of it, and was good. Like he made some cool music and picked up on his own deal. But it was just, that's how crazy that video was. That like a guy somehow, leveraged some fame out of it in a way, because like that was on Much Music all the time for like a year or whatever, for sure. What's funny, an example of that album and how the American industry is, like they didn't like that video. They wanted to do their own video. So we got another video, spent $250,000 on some carnival looking thing that got played a couple of times on Much Music or MTV, and then they just started playing the Canadian version again. So there's
it's so fickle,
they thought that they thought, well, this song's great, but this video's not good, so we got to do a different video. But people don't give a shit about that stuff. It's more like trying to figure out something just so they can have their own people feel like they're involved.
So when listening to this album, but all the Our Lady Peace albums, your drums really stand out. And I'm going to make an example here, and let me know if you agree with this. To me, you're one of the rare drummers that has the ability to create hooks with your drums. So you're not just keeping time in the background. It's like you are an extra instrument. You are creating hooks. You're at the forefront. And I would compare you with John Wysocki of Stained, Chad Zaliga of Breaking Benjamin, Neil Sanderson of 3 Days Grace. They all have the ability to create extra hooks within their music. Does that make sense as an example?
Sure. I mean, I always felt as a drummer, like, rock music, it's like you have a very small box in which to create, because you don't want to do anything that's going to be off-putting or crazy. So you have to kind of work. For me, it was always working within the melody. Like I find a vocal is the best kind of barometer for the song, and you follow that, and you try to create something that's hooky, if you were just to hear the drum track on its own, you know. So, and I'm the type of drummer that likes to have someone tapping their foot. Like, that's the whole point for me. So I think what's hooky is also, sometimes what you think might sound hooky to me is grounding the beat, like in terms of like grounding it, like a electric grounding, you know, like giving it a sense of, you know, a turnaround or something like that, something that gives it more strength, more foundation. And I mean, I used to, my favorite drummers are also a lot of the American session drummers throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, whether it be the Styx guys, the Motown guys, the Wrecking Crew, like all those incredible musicians. It's all based on feel and trying to get someone to tap their foot, you know. I think is it Motown, where they had like the Berry Gordy would listen to the records and there would be like worn out footprints because he would dance when he was listening to it, and if it didn't make him dance and it wasn't ready, you know. So those elements, that's music to me. And you know, I think from day one, rhythm is the whole concept here, you know. Like, that's what connects your ears, and that's what makes you, you know, it's the same thing that gets you walking as a person, the balance of movement, you know, things being even. So yeah.
So we have a fan question sent in from Paul Murphy. His question is, what is your favorite moment meeting or performing with a celebrity? And then he just wanted to share how the album Clumsy affected him personally. He said, I cried like a girl the first time I heard Clumsy. It triggered my poor relationship I had with my dad, as I could put that song into my perspective.
Well, that's good that he got some emotion out of that. But what was the first part of it again?
The question is, what's your favorite moment meeting or performing with a celebrity?
I don't know. I always think it's funny when I see really famous people pissed off. You know, like one time we were doing morning radio in San Diego, and you remember Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, Robin Leach, that guy. He was like, I was sitting in this chair facing the front door, and he was knocking on the door, and I was so tired that I was like, I don't want to get up. Like, I don't want to get up and have to get the door, because I thought there was like a reception person around the corner. And so I didn't get up. I was waiting for the other person, because it was morning radio, and we had done a show in LA the night before and driven that morning from LA. So it was like an hour, a traffic hour and a half, maybe more drive. So I got up and I had literally no sleep. So I was like just kind of fading in and out. And Robin Leach is knocking on the door, and then he starts banging on the door. And I'm just looking at him, and at this point, I'm like, "Hey, guys, look!" And it's like Robin Leach is really pissed off up there, and he's like, at this point, yelling and like spewing. I can see spit coming out of his mouth, and he's banging fucking. And eventually, the intern. So the madder he got, there's like, well, now I'm really not answering the door.
Now it's dangerous if you open the door. So.
No, I was enjoying it too much. I was like, this is nuts, man. Look at how crazy this is. And then the guy, reception person, whoever comes in, opens the door. He's like, what the fuck is wrong with you, you fucking asshole? You can't open the fucking door. He's walking by me. And of course, I was just like almost crying, laughing, because it's just, man, again, this brings back to maybe my dad, how angry, when he would really get angry, it was so hardcore and crazy. When I see other people get angry over like a door not getting open, it cracks me up, man. I was like, that's not mad. You don't know mad.
So last year was the 25th anniversary of the release of Clumsy. Does it feel like it's been 25 years, or does it feel like a few years ago?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it feels like it in terms of, if you think back of the things that have changed in my life, you know, like married, kids, 3 kids, like massive changes. So I have a son who's almost 17. So yeah, it feels like 25 years. But at the same time, I do remember it like yesterday in terms of how it went, and being there and enjoying parts of it and not enjoying parts of it. Just the speed and the success and the craziness of being a band dealing with that success, and then the you know, the fun of making a third album after that success, which is kind of even more insane.
So behind me here, this is kind of the wall of fame. So these are my favorite 12 albums from guests that have been on the podcast. I'm about to put 6 more albums up behind me here. And now that you've been on, I'm going to add Clumsy to the wall of fame in your honor. So that'll be up very shortly.
Wicked,
And
thank you.
yeah, there's some amazing bands there that I'm sure you know members
Mm-hmm.
of or you've played with along the way. So you're in good company. So up next, in 1999, you guys released Happiness Is Not a Fish That You Can Catch. 4 singles, One Man Army, Annie, Is Anybody Home, and Thief. Debuts at #1, 3 times platinum. When listening to the album, 2 things really stood out to me. So #1, I found that Rain's vocals sounded the best they've ever sounded. They were upfront, they were warm. There was like this tasty amount of reverb on them. His performance was great, so that stood out. And then also the drums, like I mentioned before, the drums on probably half of the songs on the album seem like they're the lead instrument. Songs like One Man Army, Potato Girl, Thief, Lying Awake, Annie, and Consequences of Laughing. Did you guys feel massive pressure following up the diamond selling Clumsy album with this album? Did you feel like how do we recreate this?
Yeah, well, I mean, this record, I think it was, well, the cool thing about this record is this is us at our best, just in terms of, because we had toured so much, and as musicians, you know, like this was the first record I didn't have any like difficulty recording, you know what I mean? Like it was like we had our ideas, we went in, it was like, you know, boom, like after 5-6 takes and we're good to go, kind of like that was, you know, fix a couple things and move on. Whereas, you know, the first record was hell, second record was hard but not hell. But this was the first record was like, okay, I feel like come in, you know, this is what I want to do. And what I wanted to do was pretty complicated. Like in the pre-production, we were really pushing this record to be different and wanted it to be, you know, because Clumsy was so popular, different than that. So I think I kind of took that in personally as a drummer. I was like, well, okay, if this is my opportunity to really stretch out, then let's do that. It's like, so I feel, yeah, there's a lot of busy, crazy stuff on this record. But in my mind, I was like, I love it because, like you said, it is really kind of a lead instrument, because you would never play drums this busy on anything ever. So, but I mean, these songs are not those songs without that kind of that skeleton happening, you know.
With the amount of music that's created globally, it's very hard to have a unique sound. Yet Our Lady Peace sounds like Our Lady Peace. You guys have a signature sound. How important was it to the band to really cultivate that original sound? And like you mentioned on this album specifically, it was very unique.
Yeah, well,
Like,
I think
like
we
One Man
achieved.
Army, like when you hear One Man Army on the radio, I mean, that literally sounds like nothing else.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also I think just I think we really achieved that in terms of like artistically what we were trying to do on that record. We achieved. It's just the opposite happened. We expected it to sell more than Clumsy, but it didn't. It sold like half of what Clumsy did, and that kind of put us in a different spin, you know, in not a great way, because like here we are at our artistic peak by doing a record like that and playing like that, you know, arrangement wise and everything. And it didn't really turn out to be as successful as Clumsy. So more Rain than any of us was probably taken back by that, and in a negative way, you know. And I don't know, in a sense, that kind of, because the success of Clumsy never ever came back in that regard, with exception to Gravity and, you know, some of those singles in America that did a lot better comparatively in a while. So I think that was the first time that and again, I'll say it's more kind of Rain, because he, you know, being the main songwriter and kind of leader, he wanted that, I'm sure, the same success, if not more, than Clumsy. And by that not happening, it kind of started a bit of a tailspin, I think, you know, with where this boat's going, you know.
The title of the album is so unique. Do you remember how you guys came up with that title, or how you chose that title?
The Happiness?
Yeah, like the full title
Yeah, again,
I remember it being,
you know,
unique when it first came out.
Yeah, that's classic singer stuff. Like, you know, I always was like, why is it so long? Well, if it brings up the question, great. But I've always called that record Happiness myself, and I think it's my favorite album that we made. And, you know, obviously there's the connection with Elvin Jones on that record as well, with Stealing Babies. So I mean, that record, to me, it was probably the most fun that I had, because, you know, not to mention we had catering in the studio. Like, it was that, you know, we were living off the fruits of Clumsy. So we had like Nino, this bod from Woodbridge, was cooking up eats every day. So it was quite a scene.
Living the dream.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a fan question that I was going to ask later, but you just answered it. Tyler Finney wants to know, what's your favorite Our Lady Peace album and your favorite Our Lady Peace song? So you just mentioned that Happiness is maybe your favorite album. Do you have a favorite song?
Yeah, I'd say Stealing Babies, just because I got to play on top of Elvin. I got to sit there and kind of aid him in the arrangement with headphones and let him know what he was, you know, where the song was going, and conduct in a manner. And, you know, just to get to know him and have him guest on that record, was such a special part of my life as a musician and as a person, because I got to know him on that record. So yeah, I would definitely say Happiness for sure. There's a lot of great drum tracks on, like, Potato Girl's one of my favorite songs ever, like, by Our Lady Peace, just because the drums are so fucked, you know. Happiness, the song, like, those drums are way out there. Lying Awake, Annie, those are all just kind of you know, I was building my left hand up a lot and stuff, where I was doing my left hand, like, generally I'm a right-handed drummer, so my right hand is like 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 in a beat, playing, you know, 3 times more than my left hand. So I started practicing my left hand, so it was more like but with my left hand. And then I found, well, if my left hand becomes busier, I can start adding accents and pushing other ways of pivot points in the groove of the song. So that record, I was really going to the degree with the left hand shit.
So I have some kind words sent in here from Alf Annabellini. So he's a member of the supergroup Envy of None with Alex Lifeson of Rush, but he's also a top recording engineer working with Our Lady Peace, DMX, Tea Party, Arkells. And this is what Alf has to say. It says, the first time I met Jeremy was when Terry Sawchuk and I were mixing an instrumental version of the SWAT movie theme that OLP had done. Terry had worked on some early OLP records, and as a newcomer, I was immediately welcomed into their club, and many laughs ensued, along with some good work. Years later, our paths crossed again when our mutual pal Tim Oxford, drummer for the Arkells, recommended me for the Taggart and Torrance mix gig. I love the experience along with the chance to reconnect on a personal level. Musically, Jeremy is the type of drummer whose playing and groove are instantly recognizable, and whatever he plays on becomes infinitely better. I mean, imagine those OLP records without his drums. You can't. I love me some Taggart. So that's from Alf Annabellini.
He's a great guy, and yeah, it's great to look back and know there's buds like Alf out there from day one. You know, he was always a name I'd hear, and just a big smile on my face when I see him. Right, it's a great guy.
I have the cover of the album right here, Envy of Night.
Nice.
So he's been a guest on the podcast twice. And let's dive into Spiritual Machines. So this is in 2000, 3 singles, In Repair, Life, Right Behind You, goes 2 times platinum from critics. So this was highly praised by fans and critics alike as being one of Our Lady Peace's finest releases, and has also been proclaimed as being the height of their artistic creativity. So this was kind of a departure in the sense that it's a concept album, different themes. There's some spoken word tracks on there. I heard that it took some of the members a little bit of time to warm up to that concept. Is that true?
Well, yeah, I guess for sure, because Mike Turner found the book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, and started reading it. And I was like, I thought it was like some nerdy bullshit. And I'm like, what are we doing this for?
Which it kind of is.
Yeah, but for sure. But I did appreciate the idea of what it would be like if we kind of go with this. Artificial intelligence at that time was something that was legitimate, to something that, you know, here now we are dealing with it, and then the whole thing was 2029, and we're getting closer and closer to 2029 and singularity, and actually the idea is happening, like, because technology was it doubles or whatever every year, and it's easy to predict where technology is going to go. It's the only thing that gets more intelligent, not us. We're always going to be,
we're the dumb apes forever. Yeah.
Well, Einstein, like, right, that he's been gone for a long time, but he's still, I think, the smartest one of us.
He's still the goat.
Yeah. We're not getting any smarter, but intelligence artificially is. So it was just a cool idea when I heard it first in that regard. But I did think that was like, we're really gonna like put everything, all the songs are about this now, like, so there was a little bit of that pushback from me. But once I realized that, like, it actually makes sense, and the songs, if we can tie them together honestly, then sure, let's do it. And it ended up being, I think it really tied it together better and nicely. So yeah, I have no problem at all with, I thought the artwork was amazing. The Ollie Goldsmith stuff was fantastic, and that helped too. Once I started seeing Ollie's artwork, I was like, okay, like the In Repair video, I was like, this is amazing. This is really cool. This makes perfect sense. If we can connect with this kind of integrity, then I'm in for sure.
So this these are some notes that I found on this album. The album is noted as being the end of an era for Our Lady Peace, as it was the last album produced by Arnold Lanni, the last to feature original guitarist Mike Turner in full, the last studio album to feature art model Saul Fox until the recent album in 2021 on its cover, and it was the last album to feature Maida's high falsetto singing voice prominently. Do you agree with those things, that it was kind of the end of an era for all those reasons?
Well, production wise, for sure. And also the fact that Bob Rock's production style is different, that marks a difference, and that's where it seems different, is because Bob sounds a lot different, and Gravity has a sonically completely different kind of palette. So yeah, it does. And
it's kind of a turning point. Yeah.
For sure, absolutely. And things were kind of on that record getting to the point where we went even further left in terms of going creatively different with this record, as opposed to like, oh, we're going to try and be more singer-songwriter-y like Clumsy. No, we went completely the other direction. So I think that was the other thing too. Like without the success again, like we did those clumsy numbers never came back that way. So I think at that point we're like, well, as cool as this is, you know, the idea of like wanting to have that same success level affected us as well, in probably a negative way, you know. So that's that. I think that's why we started to question what was going on. Period. At that point.
So last question about that album, then we'll move on to Gravity with Bob Rock. So Matt Cameron, drummer for Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, played on a couple tracks. Apparently that's because you were injured at that point in the recording. What happened? What's the story behind this?
Yes, I was injured. I hurt I chipped my tibia in an altercation with a guy in a park, which is ridiculous. And I basically was sidelined for, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And the coolest thing was Pearl Jam was coming to town, and I had known Matt for a while at this point, and I asked him if he would come and play on these couple tracks that I couldn't do, you know, and he was super sweet and came in on his day off and crushed the 2 songs in a few hours, like a couple hours, just like Matt always does. And he, you know, he played the songs great, you know, like was Right Behind You and Are You Sad?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, you know, he really added vibe to those songs. So like my parts were there when he recorded them, but like he added different things that I always ended up playing, you know. For example, the way he played Are You Sad, it was different than, you know, some subtle differences in terms of the fills and feels. I was like, I went right after where he went. So he's a great guy, sweetest. I'd say probably the nicest guy out there, because I've never heard him say bad things about anybody, and he's just like a massive legend. So you know, he was one of the few big drummers out there that I was like, you know, early on was like, man, this guy is fucking incredible, and kind of changed my, before I heard him and after I heard him, I was a different kind of drummer, you know. So huge influence.
I saw that for his birthday, you recorded a drum video. I think it was Spoon Man that you were playing.
Yeah.
And then he actually responded saying thank you.
Yeah.
And so that was cool.
For sure, man. Yeah, he's a great dude. And I saw him at the Pearl Jam Hamilton show last year. So I got to see him. He's just like I said, just, you know, those guys, Pearl Jam, all of them, they're just so nice, you know, so down to earth and sweet. So it's always a pleasure to see him.
So in 2002, you guys released Gravity, 3 singles, Somewhere Out There, Innocent, Made of Steel, 2 times platinum in Canada, gold in the US. It's your first top 10 album in the US. This is a big deal, this album. It wins the Juno Award for Rock Album of the Year. This is the band's 4th Juno win. What do the Juno Awards mean to you? I mean, this is Canada's Grammys. What does it mean that your country acknowledges your hard work and your craft?
I've always, you know, ever since seeing John Candy and, you know, Rick Moranis hosting it, or Eugene Levy, like I was a huge SCTV guy growing up. So I think seeing my heroes on the Junos was a big thing from the start. But it's just it's just everything. It's the beauty of Canada, especially when you think back, like the Burton Cummings days, or like I remember being in the Junos dressing room and all of a sudden Kim Mitchell pounds through our dressing room door with a chicken suit on. And he's like, "Hey guys, you guys plow, man. Nice job." like that's classic right there. Like, so to you know, just to be recognized in this kind of vacuum that is Canada in comparison to the rest of the world, the warts and allness of the, you know, Canadian media, like in terms of TV and growing up with the shows, like it wasn't the best stuff, but it's still our stuff, you know. And so I don't know, the Junos really was like, you know, the first one I went to, it just had and that whole feeling when you're looking around and you see Gordon Lightfoot and all the classic, Canadian people from history just hanging out. It's something to behold. I don't know. And I think this country, it gets better and better, and we can be a hell of a lot better. But it's all that when you go to the Junos, you get to kind of surround yourself with what we are, and the fact that it's getting bigger and bigger every year. It's amazing. So it's starting to feel more and more kind of a world thing than what it was with a Canadian thing. So it's like, but it makes sense with, I think, the fact that Canadian music is so big everywhere. It's the pop
Drake
artists,
and Bieber, and yeah.
It really is like, it moves the needle on so many different levels and different styles. So it just feels so international now that, when the first one I was at in Toronto back in 1993 or whatever, and now the difference is astronomical. Even, I remember it's kind of the rise and fall of Much Music too, like how big the Much Music Awards started to get, and to the point where I guess it was just too big to do it anymore, right? So, we've come a long way, man. But it's kind of like the party's gotten to the point where I don't even know if I can get an invite. So that's how it is.
The two singles from the album, well, there's three singles, but the first two singles, Somewhere Out There and Innocent, were massive hits, not just in Canada, but globally. And this is the first album we mentioned not produced by Arnold Lanni. There was a scheduling conflict. I guess maybe he was going to come in for it. Scheduling conflict with A Simple Plan debut album.
No, that's not true.
That is not factual.
We made a conscious change with Bob, for sure, definitely.
Okay, awesome. And for our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with Bob Rock, this guy made, all these incredible albums, but the Black Album from Metallica, which is still to this day the best-selling album in the US since 1991, 16 times platinum. How different was it to work with Bob versus working with Arnold? It's two different styles, two different sounds.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to say, because at the time we were like, we were kind of like, I know I personally had a letter written that I was leaving the band, like right before around this time. And so I was already kind of had a half a foot out the door, and I was talked back in by Eric, our manager. And so working with Bob was kind of like a transition that was necessary to kind of rebuild, I guess, a spark, something, because and there was an element of the whole band, not just me leaving. I was like, I'm leaving, got talked back in, and then like, I don't know, a year after that, like everybody were blown, this is done. And I think it was around the time Rain was moving to LA, so there was that was what was going on, and we're like, let's just try doing this record with Bob and see how it goes. That was kind of how it was. So obviously things with Mike were going sour, and so we were in Gravity. It was kind of like, I don't know, like a divorce feeling, like everyone didn't know which way to go or what was going to happen. So Bob was actually just a kind of savior at the time, because he's such a positive guy, and his experience is so vast, and he's seen it all, he's done it all. There's nothing you can say to him that's going to push anything around. So it was, at the time, it was just kind of a breath of fresh air, and kind of reconnected us all to what this was. And we had songs that were back on the radio in a huge way, so like with the success of the album, it was definitely a turning point in a lot of different ways. Obviously Mike not being around, and going forward with Steve as the new guitar player, and Jamie Edwards was with us at the time, and he left. And then so we started the live show changed a bit with having Mike Eisenstein with us as well. So there was just a lot of different changes. I just remember my friend Stacy Jones, who's Miley Cyrus's music director, and he's played with American Hi-Fi, his band, and Letters to Cleo before that. He's one of my best friends, and he had told me, working with Bob was such a great thing for him, and he's like, you guys should try working with him. He's a great guy, and it's awesome. You go to Hawaii, and his studio's incredible. He's got all this amazing gear. Just go check it out. And that was basically what happened. We went to Hawaii and hit the ground running with Bob. Like, he gets it. I'm sure he's seen bands in our position a million times, and bands that were 100 times more successful than us, and he's able to push the right buttons to kind of get us working again. So like to where we were mentally, and I think everyone was kind of itching to try something else, you know what I mean? So to get what he got out of us, and to the next 2 years around that record and the success that we had, we're solidly back in arenas and touring on a huge scale in Canada. So it was something definitely that was needed for sure.
So that album made it 5 in a row that all went at least double platinum, which is what band starts off their career with 5 albums that are at least double platinum? That's incredible. And I have a fan question sent in here, and this is a little different because it's sent in from someone you actually know. So this is kind of funny. So a fan question, but it's from Rich Meisner, who's been with Our Lady Peace for 15 years, working on the band's videos, artwork, and merchandise. So this is what Rich sent in. So it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. But Rich says, just ask him about Jim Gordon. That should take care of the entire 2-hour interview.
Yeah, there you go. So he knows that Jim Gordon's an American session drummer, and I love him. And he's played on everything, to the point where it's like, I listen to music all the time, generally in my house or hanging out. So, and I like to listen to, contemporary music from the 60s, 70s, 80s, mostly, generally, just because it's a good vibe. And usually the heavy studio guys, like your yacht rockers and shit like that, like I can deal with that live off the floor 1977 room. So Jim Gordon is on like 30% of all those songs. So Rich at the time was just hanging out with me a lot, and like, hey, did you know Jim Gordon's on? Hey, Jim Gordon's on. Hey, that's Jim Gordon. So he was sick and tired of Jim Gordon. But yeah, Jim Gordon's a great drummer.
So
crazy story.
Yeah, he's a great drummer, but there's also a dark ending to this story.
Well, right? He suffered from schizophrenia and didn't take the proper medications, literally hearing voices. And a lot of the times with schizophrenic behavior, for some reason, the concern and the voices that they hear always goes back to their mother. I don't know why it's such a common thing, but he went and heard voices, and he killed his mother, and now he's in prison for the rest of his life. But this happened in the early 80s or something like that. But really kind of sidelined his whole thing, because he was this storied, legendary American session musician that ended up incarcerated for the rest of his life because he was, obviously not medicated and not diagnosed properly. Another example of mental health, kind of going the wrong way.
Yeah, unfortunately, back then things weren't diagnosed properly and they weren't medicated properly. And maybe if he had that today's day, things maybe might have turned out differently. So it's sad that ended up happening. So we have about 20 minutes or so left in the interview. There's still 3 more albums to go through. we have between 2005 and 2012, we have Healthy and Paranoid Times, Burn, Burn, and Curve. I have a bunch of questions for all those albums, but I do want to get into the Taggart and Torrance podcast. That's important to me to dive into. So I guess maybe looking at those final three albums, is there any behind the scenes stories that you can share about any of those three albums? Just anything that comes to you now that is worth sharing with our listeners from those final three albums?
Well, I mean, that was kind of the ultimate transition, I guess, well, because the Burn Burn with Bob, or Healthy and Paranoid Times with Bob, was kind of like another transition, basically, from working with a producer to kind of being an indie band producing themselves, and that's, once we finished working with Bob, that kind of became the thing. It was like more of an indie band. It wasn't the same in terms of the way we approached writing, recording, and pre-production. It was more like kind of small batches. That's how it is when you're doing indie stuff. You can't go into a room together for 6 weeks and write songs anymore.
And Rain produced the final two albums, right? They were
and basically all of us in a room in his studio, so but like kind of flying down for a week and doing it and then going home for 3 months and coming back. So it's different. Like it's not my cup of tea, and probably one of the reasons why I was finally decided that that's enough. I mean, for another, like, there was an instance on that the last record with Bob where I left again, and then like Bob was like, "No, don't leave." So I mean, my foot was kind of just like in and out, in and out, in and out, and over the last few years, it was just kind of inevitable eventually, where it's like, no, I have to try something else. So I literally, after 21 years, I was like, no, I'm doing this. That's that.
Well, it's more than half your life, right? So
yeah, exactly. I mean, what to if any more than that, it just becomes your life, and I just didn't want that to be the case for me.
So we have one fan question, then we'll jump into the podcast. So Amanda Luciano wants to know, what's the craziest fan interaction you've experienced? So maybe it's funny or memorable or inspiring or crazy, who knows?
Well, I just remember like having a really great connection with the fans, and I remember so many hours of just kind of escaping with fans and chatting with fans for hours after the bus, outside the venue, like having a laugh, chatting and talk. Like I did that a lot, and I think overall I just appreciated the closeness that we had. And I think any fan that ever met me or hung out after one of those shows knows what I'm talking about, because it was something that became part of our thing. And the fans that would come to several shows would kind of become part of that hang, and it was a special part of being on the road for me, which is kind of just connecting and having a few laughs with the buds.
So you started the podcast in 2014, over 4 million downloads. How did you originally meet Jonathan, and where did the idea of starting a podcast together come from?
Well, I had been the Trailer Park Boys actually emceed the Gravity Tour. The three boys and Mike Clattenburg came on the road, and I started to get to know Jonathan through the Mike Smith and the boys. So he was always like, when we would be joking around with Rob Wells and JP and Clattenburg, they would always be like, "Oh, you got to meet Jonathan, man. He's hilarious. You guys would really, I think, get along great." And once I did meet him, because we're both really similar, where like, hey, look, there's a blank looking mask, or like, hey, there's a Rob Reiner looking mask bagging groceries at Sobeys, right? Like, we're able to kind of see someone with someone else and then say, hey, doesn't that guy look like this person? And then that person starts laughing because there's enough of a connection for that like Jonathan and I really love doing that's kind of our, baseline sense of humor. So every time that's not all we do, but like it's just one of the things that those guys were like, hey, you got to meet Jonathan because he does that all the time and cracks us up. So literally the first time I met him face to face, I saw him from far away, I think, and it was at a golf tournament. And I was like, hey, nice swing, Jack Wagner looking Mac, like the Jack Wagner, the actor guy. And then he said, oh, thanks, forefathers of Canada looking Mac. So like really kind of hammered back and forth and right away and became really quick friends. And I just remember talking to him on the phone anytime I'd speak to him, laughing hysterically at some point. And when I started doing podcasts, like I had my own podcast called Taggart's Take back in 2006. And that was just me and Tim Oxford from Arkell's recording it. And, he helped me just kind of piece together 5-minute clips for The Edge and all these other chorus stations. So I was like, well, podcasting by 2014 started becoming a thing for real. And I was like, well, instead of doing that, which was so much work and, piecing together bits, I just thought it would be funnier. And this by part of going on the Jay and Dan podcast, Jay Onright and Dan O'Toole, their conversations. And then I heard Jonathan go on their podcast, and I was like, okay, me and Jonathan should just do that where it's conversation. And that was it. We started doing a podcast we tried doing it with guests for about 6 or 7 episodes. And I was like, well, why don't we try doing this without guests? Because it feels like the funniest stuff is when we're just kind of fucking around. And if we can popularize just us fucking around instead and have to, you know more than anybody how hard it is to try and get guests every week. You know what I mean? So, and not to mention, like, you never know what the guest's going to be like. It could be shit, it could be a bad, boring kind of interview. So when you're doing it all the time, it's like you can't expect that level on the other side to be there. So we just felt like our banter was enough. And we were right. It ended up being good enough for people to kind of sit and feel like they're in a conversation. Our podcast is really just that. It's us connecting. And anyone listening feels like they're like in the back seat or like hanging out with us, where, they might even want to jump in on the conversation. So if we do live shows, that's what it feels like even more, where people actually can jump in on the conversation. So we've built something really special. And it really is a pleasure to do it with Jonathan, because he's such a funny guy and super smart and a great person, like really amazing family oriented guy like myself.
So in 2017, you guys released a book, Canadianity, Tales from the True, North, Strong, and Freezing. For our listeners that haven't picked up that book yet, what can you give kind of a synopsis of what to expect in that book?
Yeah, I mean, that book is it's HarperCollins, and you can get it on Audible as well as an audiobook, but you can get it anywhere, Amazon to your local chapters, but or Indigo. The beauty of that book is just it's Jonathan and I's kind of perspective of growing up in this country, and it's also a collection of what to do. So there's breakups of the country itself, the different provinces, our experiences in different parts of Canada. And also we had buds from our podcast right in. So there's there's a little bit of a how-to element of like the best of Canada in there too. So it's kind of it's a great toilet read. It's a good one to just pick up, and you could probably rip through it in an hour and a half.
So the book charted at number 4, and then the audiobook went to number 1 on Audible. And you guys actually recorded the audiobook yourselves. What was that experience like? Was it harder to record the audiobook than it was to record drums in the studio?
Oh, fuck yeah, for sure. Yeah, big time. It was, it's funny because Jonathan, for a job, obviously he's a great broadcaster, and he's one of those people that can read a teleprompter like crazy. He can also retain lines as an actor. He's great at remembering stuff. I'm terrible at lines. Like I have to read what I'm saying always. So for him, he probably did the whole book in like as long as it takes to read it, which is, I don't know, 2-3 hours or something. But for me, it took me 3 days of like 6 hours each day, and like line per line having to stop and maybe get like, I think the most I got was 2 lines without having to, the engineer to stop and repeat. And because you have to do the word for word exact how it is, or else you got to redo it. So yeah, that was real pain for sure.
The engineer had their work cut out for them trying to piece everything together.
Yeah, well, yeah, it just was slower. It was real piecemeal.
So in 2020, you guys released the album Buds. What has the reception been like since then?
Great, man. It really kind of, I think the pandemic was, in a sense, it was almost good for the podcast because it kind of gave people a chance to connect or do something when there was nothing to do. So we've just kind of we haven't gone back and done live shows yet, but once we do that, we'll kind of see the full connection. But I really feel like people have been hanging with us through the pandemic, and I think having something every week to rely on has been good for everybody for sure.
And the podcast and the book and the album, it's all like a celebration of all things Canada. Why is that important to you to celebrate that?
Well, I mean, it's who we are. It's where we came from. And like I said before, this is a great country. I think it could be a lot better. But I really feel like this is the best place for the future of the world. You couldn't ask for a better place to be. And that the whole concept of the podcast is just Canadianity being something that's fantastic and something that could be better. And we can work towards being one of the most positive places to be.
So we have a fan question. I believe this is the last fan question. This is from Jarrett Tupper. His question is, who are some new bands and drummers that you are listening to right now?
New drummers. Well, I mean, there's so many now. There's not really necessarily new drummers. There's kids. There's a lot of really great live drummers out there. Like I think his name's Marshall. He plays with Billie Eilish. He's a great drummer.
Yeah, just any new bands that you're into, or
well, yeah, I think with new bands, like it's most new music I listen to now is like digitally, like whether it be hip hop or artists that are completely sonically different. There's a group, I can't remember their name, but it's just a 2-piece, and the drummer isn't fantastic. But I don't want to.
Royal Blood?
No, they're more kind of smaller out there.
Okay.
But like Royal Blood, I think is like an old band. You know what I mean? Like
they are now, yeah. It's been a few years.
There's like I'm thinking like I can't remember the name, but I would have to get back to you on that. But I really,
that's all good.
My music is like just I go back further and further and further. And I also like to listen to like genres and years of music. You know what I mean? I'll go to like 1967 deep tracks and try and find music that like still got the same great musicians, but songs I haven't heard. So I apologize to not be able to throw down 10 new bands that are killer right now, but like it just keeps going back further and further for me.
That's all good. I have a quote here from an amazing drummer. This is from Rich Bedeau, former drummer for Finger 11 and Saint Asonia. He provides amazing quotes. So this is a lengthy one, so hang with me here. He says, "I've known Jeremy for well over 20 years now, but let me start at the beginning. I knew OLP's music from the day it came out and was instantly hooked. But it was when Clumsy came along that I became Jeremy Taggart's biggest fan. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could a drummer be coming up with these iconic drum parts in every single song, all the while still servicing the song and making them absolute radio hits? Who is this guy and how is he doing this? The sound of his drums alone were something I had never heard before, and his playing was something I had never heard before. My life was changed forever because of Jeremy. With every new record OLP put out, Jeremy continued to write the most iconic drum parts and threw curveballs at me. But again, most importantly, always servicing the song first. As I began my music career with Finger 11, we were lucky enough to share the stage with him many times. OLP helped our band's career more than any other band, and I've been lucky enough to call Jeremy my friend and brother. We've played golf video games together. We've gotten shithouse drunk together. Heck, we may have even argued over girls together, but we'll keep that between us. Jeremy, I have been in awe of you since day one. Now I can add amazing father and husband to that list as well. I love you, dude, and truly thank you for everything you've done for me as a drummer and everything you did for our band along the way. So that's from Rich Beto.
Thanks, Rich. He's a great dude. Love you back, man. Yeah. Always was happy to do anything with anybody else, to be honest. Like, anyone that was like nice or working hard at something that I thought was trying to do it, that's a great example. Like Finger 11, even when they were the Butt Monkeys early on, like, they were just so sweet and such nice guys that, they became, once our manager started managing them, that obviously is a big part of the reason that we did a lot of things together. But can't say enough nice things about those guys. We did give Arnold a smack on the wrist though, for I'm not sure which record. It might be the one behind you, but
Grace of Blue Skies.
That's it wasn't Rich, not the one Rich played on, but that's literally
Tip, the first one in 98.
The snare sound, we were like, okay, hold up, Arn, that's a little too fucking close there, bud.
He uses experience with OLP to get that sound.
We definitely have words with Arnold when we heard that record going, okay,
that is a copyrighted proprietary drum sound.
It might have affected the way our snare sounded from then on, to be honest. Like, well, now that we're not sharing that, we're gonna have to change that. So yeah, but there's a little piece of information that people definitely didn't know.
So I have just 3 final questions and then we'll wrap up. And there's something that we do here on the podcast where we have the guest provide a question for the next guest without knowing who it is. They provide a question, whether it's funny or memorable or inspiring, any question. So the last guest that provided a question for you, what's awesome is you actually have a connection with them. So the last guest was Jill Zimmerman, recording audio engineer. She worked on 7 albums in 2022 and 4 of them got nominated for Junos with the recent announcements. Here's the question that Jill Zimmerman asked without knowing that it's you. She asked, what was the holy shit moment in your life when you knew that this is what you wanted to do? So that's from Jill.
Yeah. Well, I remember having a moment of not even playing music. I think I was a drummer. It was probably like 1991 or something. And I was walking behind Maple Leaf Gardens and U2 was playing inside, and it was the Actung Baby tour, I think. And I was just walking around backstage, like not backstage, but behind the arena, like not in the arena. And I saw all the trucks and the road cases and shit. And I was just like, I don't know why I'm feeling this, but I really feel like this is normal. This is going to be me at some moment in my life. I felt a connection to all that gear just sitting there. And as a kid, just sitting in at the time, 16, with bands going like, this feels familiar. Like, I feel like this is going to be me at some point. And it happened a few years later. We sold out Maple Leaf Gardens. And I remember walking home after that gig and going, fuck, here we are, man. I wasn't kidding. So yeah,
You had a
Got to go with that.
premonition, and you had a premonition, and then you had a deja vu once it
Yeah,
happened.
well, I mean, that's the thing. It really is. There's something to be said about like positive thought and trying to, ambition, all those things. It's real, man. It definitely is.
So Jill provided that question without knowing who the guest was. And then once she provided the question, I said, oh, actually, the guest is Jeremy Taggart. And then she provided these words. She said, I had the pleasure of working with Jeremy for 2 sessions. He is such a unique and skilled drummer, but also a funny and kind person that says things how they are. Working with him was effortless, and I could work with him anytime again. So that's from Jill Zimmerman.
Jill's amazing, by the way. Always a pleasure to work with, and great, amazing person.
And it's putting you on the spot, but can you provide a question now for the next guest without knowing who it is? Anything that comes to mind.
Okay. 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 Who's the person or who's the person that made you want to become a musician?
Perfect. Just writing it down. Awesome. And schedule.
And that person doesn't have to be a famous person. That could be, a person in your family,
Very true. So, schedules change, but the next guest is supposed to be David Bottrell, Tool producer, Peter Gabriel, 3-time Grammy winner. So that'll be a good question for David coming up. And final 2 questions. When you look back on your life and career, what are you most proud of, and what are you most grateful for?
It's kind of always goes back to this Elvin Jones, this guy back here and back here, Elvin Jones, being able to meet him, get to know him, make music with him. That's it for like, will always kind of be the highlight, because just someone I always thought was a legend, and I got to know him and, laugh with him and all of those amazing things. So, that will always be the highlight. What was the second part of it? The
most proud of and most grateful for.
Yeah. Most grateful would be the success that the people out there that bought our music, like the success, the fact that they listened and still listen and get off on the music. Like, how could I not be grateful for that the most? Like, that's purely my career and everything about music, aside from my family, is the success that was really given to us by the public.
And final question, if you could go back in time and you could sit down next to your 10-year-old self, so everything from 10 years old up until now, all that life experience and ups and downs and dreams and failures and lessons and mentorship, all that stuff, if you can whisper some words into cute little 10-year-old Jeremy's ear to help him through this life, what advice do you give to Jeremy?
I would say stay cool, because me at 10 years old and compared to now, like, I think I'd rather be that 10-year-old kid, like, to be honest, like, in terms of the mental wrap that I had as a 10-year-old kid, the perspective and like going through all the stuff and still kind of being, we didn't have a lot growing up, so it was difficult. So I had gone through a lot of stuff at 10, but I had this really super positive outlook on life, and more positive than now, just because I've ran the course so many times that I would just say, yeah, stick with it. And you know what, man, I've got so much respect for you now. You know what I mean? Like, just so proud of that person as that age, almost more proud than I am of me today, just because, I can't see the world in the same, spectacular way. So I think that happens in life. You got to kind of hold on to that perspective of youth, and the kind of unconscious, the unconscious faith that you have in yourself, that you need to hold on to, because that gets worn away and it gets taken away by everybody that can try and rip it off of you. So you really have to realize it and stick with it.
So where can our listeners find you online, whether they want to say, hey, I love the interview, or I love the music, or I want to work with you in the future? Where do they go? Is there a website or a social media account?
Yeah, there's that. Well, I'm on Instagram at TAGGAR7. So Taggart without the T, the 7 is supposed to be a T. So it's like Taggart. And Taggart7 on Twitter, but also Taggart in Torrens, Taggart behind me with an N in the center. TaggartandTorrens.ca has all the, where you can find the podcast and other links for everything else. But yeah, that's it.
Perfect. And as we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you for your lifelong pursuit of mastery as a drummer. I want to acknowledge you for cultivating such a unique style that's inspired the next generation of drummers to think outside of the box. I want to personally thank you for creating some all-time great music. I've mentioned that I own the first 5 albums. Your music was the soundtrack to my life growing up. And I truly think that Clumsy will go down as one of the greatest Canadian albums of all time. I want to commend you for mentoring younger artists. I know you played a part in the Arkells, who have gone on to play stadiums, and they're a tremendous success story in Canada. So, keeping the dream alive in young musicians is important. I want to acknowledge you for being proudly Canadian and celebrating all things Canada and being an excellent ambassador for our country. And last but not least, I want to thank you as a fan for sitting down with me here today for the last 2+ hours. You're answering questions I've wanted to know the answer to for 20, 30 years. So it really means a lot. So Jeremy, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joel. My pleasure.
You're very welcome. So to our listeners, to the Jeremy Taggart fans, to the Our Lady Peace fans, to the Taggart and Torrent fans, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.